And now for the second part. No. I know some, I will just ask about what we did in the Diocese of Maryland. I'll just say a few minutes what that was about. But feel free to ask any questions about anything in the address or anything about reparations, what we mean by it, and where it came from, where we are in America, and in the churches, any of those questions. The Diocese of Maryland, we could say that we began 5 years ago, but really it would be 15 plus years ago. My predecessors, starting in Maryland, conversations around anti-racism and reparations. So it's been a long discussion. The issue of reparations, as you would have heard in my talk, is not a new discussion in America. This isn't something that just began 10 years ago by those radical liberal Democrats or something. As early as the early 1800s, there were some who were beginning to say, well, slavery is probably going to come to an end. What do we do with the millions of enslaved persons? We just don't release them into the streets, which basically they ended up doing in 1865. So already there was one senator in 1830-something who was some kind of scheme of repayment for Black Americans. Obviously, that can kept getting kicked down the road. The can is still on the road. The can isn't going away. And so I have every reason to believe that future generations will judge even this generation to say, why didn't you do something as a way of redressing that big inequity? The two big things you would have heard about reparations in my first address is, one, it's not about guilt. And it's not about white people writing checks to Black people. I don't want a check. I don't need a check. I'm not free. I think some of those who've been left behind need a check. And it's not about giving money to individuals, which is the way that I wrote about it. I wrote a pastoral letter to the diocese. It ended up being about 40 pages. I had a drafting committee that helped me with that went to the history of discussions about reparations and why theologically it was the just and moral thing for churches to take the lead on it. Don't wait for governments and all that. Governments are probably doing badly anyway. They really would. But let the private sector, let churches take the lead on what can happen. So not about history, not about writing the checks. It's about what this generation will do to correct the unhappy consequences of previous generations. And it's not going to go away. So in Maryland, we had about 3 years of education about this in the diocese. We went around to the different regions and talked about it. I set up conversations where I'd have one person argue forcefully for why reparations is good, just, and moral. And then I had another person in the same platform talk about why it's a bad idea. And let the people decide. Fast forward. When the people decided, there was not a dissenting vote. Not one in that 95% white diocese of Maryland. From Appalachia, in Western Maryland, to Baltimore and Washington suburbs, exurbs, and Baltimore, going east to what I call the boat people, Annapolis, the Naval Academy and all those people. down in southern Maryland, not a dissenting voice vote against the principle of reparations. And then a year and a half later, we took another vote on an amount of money taken from reserves, taken from monies that we've accumulated over the years because of slavery and segregation, redlining, the whole thing. And so it's going to mean a different thing for every diocese. Was there slavery here in Pennsylvania? Yes. But it's not just from slavery, but you get the point. And so it was 2 votes. And that one did not get 100%. That got about 86% yes vote. We set aside $1 million. But it's grown since this from donations. And grants are given every year to organizations and initiatives in the impoverished Black communities of Maryland. Impoverished communities. So we gave to those initiatives in 5 areas: education, housing, healthcare/elder care. Because good gosh, we've had, and especially for many Black elderly women who, in a more patriarchal society, the husbands working, the husbands didn't have great jobs. And then they died. They're suffering in some nursing homes with little resources. And we just didn't feel good about that in Maryland. It's stuck in our craw that some of these conditions were longstanding and the diocese benefited financially from it. So, elder care, healthcare, economic empowerment, meaning any job creation things. And the 5th area was environmental degradation in impoverished Black communities. A huge problem. The EPA, RIP, the EPA was did a great study about 10 years ago about who most felt the effects of environmental degradation. It just wasn't poor versus wealthy communities. It was Black communities who are more the recipients of dirty air, dirty water, dirty products, and its affecting health. And right here it is. Right here. So those 5 areas, and every year a grant is given to some initiative to address those issues in the impoverished Black community. There's a big program we had at the cathedral in Baltimore. We invited all the recipients to come, and then we had these big checks, $50,000, and took pictures. And then, but they each addressed the assembly on what they were doing and what that money's meant to them. Lastly, and the principle was that this is something that the Episcopal Church in Maryland is doing for groups, initiatives that don't benefit the diocese. And I'm going to tell you that has done more to change the idea and the image of the Episcopal Church in Maryland, because you have all of these groups are saying they are our friends. And they're the only religious group that's really giving us monies. And we do it not, it doesn't come from benevolence. It's not part of our mission budget or anything. This was what was owed. We're repaying what was stolen. It's not out of the goodness of our heart. And we're doing it also because we're working on our own salvation. Amen. So, especially for those, for many white members of the diocese who, I don't know about this. But in conversations, and I've heard a few of them, they can, lift their head up high and say, my church is doing something to address the consequences of 400 years of degradation. And so you can hold your head up higher and hopefully, I think, sleep better at night. So with that Q&A.
Since I'm holding the mic, I will ask the first question. Bishop Sutton, we're using the term reparations, and there's a lot of connotation, historical connotation that we have talked on the one side about. There's another side of that connotation, two things that come up, which is shame and writing checks. White people writing checks. Those are the two things that might be heard when terms like reparations are thrown around. So my question is, how did you and in the Diocese of Maryland spend time on language, on re-educating that reparations is closer to repair than to anything else?
Yeah, well, yes. At first I was thinking, well, maybe we shouldn't use that word because it's so loaded. But we want to redeem the word because, we get our cue from the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 58, you will be repairers of the breach. You will, the issue of repairing damage that has been done. Now, money. I heard someone, it was in an elevator at a convention, this is before we took a vote, and I don't know if they knew that I was their bishop. When you don't have the collar on, especially you black men know what I'm talking about. If you're just dressed every day or something, you're invisible. Right. People don't like to look at you. And so they were talking, and this woman was saying, well, this reparations thing, I know there are problems in impoverished black communities, but you can't just throw money at it. I find that image offensive. I was in a diocese that had very Tony Episcopal schools. St. Paul's School, beautiful facilities, St. Timothy's, St. James School, all this, billions of dollars poured in it, but you never hear about throwing money at these schools. The only people you throw money at are those that are less than you. You throw money at them. I find it offensive. But you never throw money at the rich. The rich cronies of a president, if the government does any contracts, you're not throwing money at the rich. You only throw it at the poor. I find it offensive. I also find it offensive the notion that reparations is what white people are doing. To throw money or give money to. As if y'all control all the money. And so, this money's coming from the diocese. Guess what? I'm paying into reparations. Recent immigrants are paying into reparations. It's not. So, for my white friends, don't feel this is something that you're doing. It's what this generation is doing. So, I've been both a beneficiary and some of my paycheck, because I've given money to the reparations fund. And I didn't cause slavery, and my ancestors didn't cause it. But it's not about who was here when. I don't care if you're a recent immigrant or you can trace it to the Puritans. We're all in the same boat. We're all swimming in the same sea. What are we going to do about it? So there is that. And then lastly about the money, the writing of checks for black people. Remember Obama when he was talking about reparations, he says, well, I'm against it because it's unworkable. He was against an idea of it, that somehow this is the government writing checks to black person. For one, as Obama knew, how do you define a black person? So if you are in a mixed race person, Do you get half a check? or it gets kind of crazy. It kind of gets to who's black and who's white. If you're a recent immigrant from Jamaica, but you're black, do you get a check because of slavery? No. That's why it's important, I believe, to talk about, look where damage has been done economically, and address the damage. Address the damage. So once that's all explained, then people can feel better about the money. Last thing I'll say on that. St. James Western Court is a small congregation in the Diocese of Maryland in Appalachia. It's coal country. My last visitation here, they said, Bishop, we have something for you. And they presented me with a check for $10,000 to go to the reparations fund for impoverished black Marylanders. Not a black person around that area. None of them had ancestors who owned slaves. They came from nothing, and there were only about 15 people left in the congregation. But they got it. They said, we want to be a part of making it right for all. It's not about how it benefited them. It's not what they caused or didn't do. But they got the message. We, even out here, have a responsibility to correct something in this state.
So, Bishop, is that philosophy shared with any other denominations? United Methodists?
It is my understanding that the Episcopal Church is doing more Episcopal dioceses, groups, and churches are doing more of reparations than any other religious group. You certainly get that by articles of notices, but it's noticed by other denominations and saying, what can we do? But the Episcopal Church also has, I believe, a particular responsibility, especially on the East Coast, because it was Anglicans who instituted slavery in a big way. Not the only ones. I mean, Jesuits did too, and all that. But also the transatlantic slave trade was in large part a product of England, the Church of England. I went to Ghana a couple of times. I went to the slave forts in Ghana. Elmina, slave castle. Have you gone, Kevin?
No.
This is the last place where those Africans who were enslaved, the last they would see of Africa.
The door of no return.
The door of no return, yes. And it's a window leading out there. You don't go back. But right above the area that they held the male slaves, dark, it was down again. Only one window, so they wouldn't asphyxiate. No provision for sanitation. Fed slop. Above that, there was an opening where I guess that fumes and things out. And that opening was just before the entrance of a church. That church was started by the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, SPG, the Anglican Church. Anglican worshipers had to walk around the hole where those were enslaved underneath so that they could get to church and worship Jesus. And talk about how Jesus loved everybody. SPG, the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, makes me wonder, now what gospel were you propagating? I don't recognize that gospel. But the gospel, according to many Americans, would allow that because their gospel doesn't have anything to say about injustice or systemic racism or degradation or holding people in cages because they're recent immigrants without documents, or waiting outside churches to arrest them when they leave the church. For many Americans, their gospel doesn't have anything to say about that. It's only about me and Jesus and getting to heaven. So the Anglican Church has a particular responsibility for the widespread practice of slavery in the Western world. The Episcopal Church is the descendant of the Church of England. We have a particular responsibility. And any reader of history would know that.
You mentioned in your first talk about the fact that African Americans received in our history books relatively little attention, and other ethnic groups also from Mexico.
Oh, yes.
Ken Burns, though, in his recent American Revolution, did lots
I know.
in a big way to promote and celebrate and demonstrate the involvement of African Americans who fought on the side of the colonial army, not with energy, and also the people come from the South, Mexico and South America, who joined the group. So Ken Burns gets a lot of credit for taking that message popular today and writing the history books department.
I agree. Please, if you have not seen that PBS series, The American Revolution, it is very monumental. And it was very noticeable, the contribution of others. In today's political climate, I think he'd be widely criticized and probably wouldn't get any government grants because he's retelling a history that's more inclusive. We have a real problem with that. Interestingly, in the Civil War, War of 1812, the Revolution and the War of 1812, Native Americans also fought for the Patriot side, but also for the British and Black Americans too. The city of Baltimore, when Star Spangled Banner, my ancestors, many of them were in the Baltimore Harbor swimming to the British troops, wanting them to win. What? And so just think about it. If you're an enslaved American or in degradation, why would you fight for this country when the British are promising you freedom? And so, yes, for large parts, we wanted the British to win. Are we non-patriotic? No. Black American citizens are the most patriotic group in this nation. And it gets me. Again, I hope you may feel differently about this, but when that quarterback, Kaepernick, he kneeled at the national anthem, you would have thought that was a seditious act, but shake of America. For one thing, the guy's an athlete, I don't deal with it. But kneeling, heck, I'm an Anglo-Catholic. When we kneel, it's holiness. That's a big sign of respect. But never critique what a Black or brown or red American does at the symbols of national unity. We're patriotic. I have relatives who spilled blood on foreign soil. They fought for this nation, and this nation did not fight for them. They came back to that religion. But so don't you dare criticize a person of color for lack of patriotism in this nation. Others?
I have another one, and I am, part of my job with the diocese as reparations consultant, and just figuring out with various groups, Union of Black Episcopalians, our beloved Community Commission, how can we get reparations off the ground? And one of the issues that I think that we are going to run into is that there are a lot of people in this room who are, of course, in favor of reparations. But there are a lot of people in our diocese who are not stepping through these doors and coming to these conversations. So how did you handle that in Maryland, and how can we do that in Susquehanna?
Well, first of all, Father, let me ask you a question. Who's your haberdasher? I want that jacket. You begin by the history. Do the history, search out the history, tell the stories. And the history will be, how many churches, does your church have any history of dealing with either slavery, redlining, segregation, restrictive covenants? Uncover the history. Oh, that'll be divisive, it'll ruin it. No, it'll be okay. Some of it may be painful, but uncover it. Once the history is uncovered, it opens doors for what you can do about it. So there may be, I'm just going to say, there may be rather limited exposure of the white congregations in this part of the state with slavery. I have many, many more. But maybe it's more segregation. And also, did this church in any way benefit, particularly, from uncompensated or undercompensated labor? Again, redlining, covenants, banking, all sorts of stuff. And was this church a white flight church when a neighborhood changed? We went, okay, you can move. Right? There's no crime in moving. Black churches do it, everybody, we're closer to where your members are. But did that have the effect of drawing economic and financial power away from that community? If that's the case, maybe a door will be open and say, this church has since benefited in some way, and we may have caused some harm. So rather than some great big scheme, maybe we will start a fund of microeconomic blending for that Black community, of which we used to be a part. Oh, that's throwing money at the poor. No. It's realizing systemically something's happened. So it's going to be different in every diocese. The Diocese of Hawaii will have a different scheme of reparations than the Diocese of Maryland. The Diocese of also Alaska. Canada does much more reparations with indigenous groups. And so that's maybe part of the history that's to be uncovered here as well. But here's what I would beg of you. When we're talking about reparations for Black Americans, keep that as it is. If there's another scheme for indigenous folk, let that be a true there. Or if you're in Asia, for indigenous Hawaiians. But this nation has a peculiar history with actually enslaving people. And so keep that as one thing. Everything is interconnected, but do that piece as it is. And Maryland right now, as I speak, has begun conversations with the Nanticoke peoples, the Piscataway peoples in Maryland. So We felt so good about the reparation for Black Americans. I wouldn't be surprised if 5 to 10 years from now, there isn't some fund or school or something for those indigenous folks. Let it all roll down. So begin with the history. And then it's education about what reparation is and what it is not. It is not guilt money. Churches don't do programs based on guilt. We do it based on call. What's the Spirit saying? What would God have you do? If Jesus were a member of your church, what would Jesus be saying? Not what the Democratic Party is saying. Not what the Republican Party is saying. Not what Fox News is saying. I was on Tucker Carlson's show. What about you? Look it up. Yeah, we're talking about reparations. And I made this statement because I testified for Congress for the House bill. But to start a commission, to start the conversation. So they had me on the show, and I said something at the testimony about how we want everybody to feel good about themselves and also. And I would think that for many white Americans, it would make them feel better even about meeting their maker. For something I'm saying, I said meeting maker, but on his show he says, so you think white people are going to hell unless they support reparations? I said, I didn't say that. Tucker's an Episcopalian. But those shows, MSN, Fox News, it's not really about news, it's about opinion. And so ratings are big. So people, I beg of you, if you watch one of those shows regularly, start to wean yourself. And do it other news. Okay, watch a little bit of it to feel good, to buttress your political opinions. But a lot of what you're being fed is geared to make you angry. Because the more angry you are, the more you watch. I'll leave it there.
Yeah. Are there historical, global examples of something similar to reparation? I think part of the issue is that it seems so monumental and unprecedented. If there's perhaps things that we could point to say, well, this was done at least on some scale. That doesn't make it so strange.
Yeah, it seems so monumental, maybe because you're talking about hundreds of years and all that scares people off. Unprecedented? Absolutely not. We gave reparations to Japanese Americans who were interned after World War II. Where was the outcry? Where was, you can't do reparations, and when it comes to enslaved persons, no. That's what I got to keep figuring. What is it about dark black skin that wakes people up? You start thinking irrationally. It's not unprecedented in the world. Germany, after World War II, did great work on educating people about Judaism and Zionism. And while there wasn't a big program of reparation, there were certainly efforts of repayment for lost properties. This is not new in the world. It's new to America in dealing with Black Americans. The Church of England has designated $10 billion to help redress the evils of the transatlantic slave trade. Yeah, billion, with a B. Church of England has a lot of money. And it's out of a fund which is estimated to be about $110 billion. That they were enriched from slavery. There's discussion about it, but they didn't tear the Church of England apart. Other issues they had. Not that. So there it is. We have to get through, why is it such an emotional issue for many Americans? I have some guesses, but I don't know. Why do you think it's so emotional? I don't know. I only have a couple of guesses. I'd like to hear from y'all. Why is the issue so emotional with many Americans? Anybody? Yeah.
You hit it. I think you hit it right on the head. The guilt wasn't me.
Yeah.
Wasn't my parents. It was a long time ago. And how in the world do you write checks to everybody? And how do you figure that out? And it's basically sort of a little bit of justice.
Well, that's legitimate.
But I think hearing that word, it kind of is the instigator of how would you do it, why, not necessarily why, but, you know, the checks, and the guilt. But you know the other word that you use is repair.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about it like that, and by the way, that wasn't my opinion, but I can tell you that's where I came up. But the repair word really, I don't know, sort of made it a little bit more positive.
Of course, because you repair something that's broken.
Yes.
And we know there's brokenness. So, well, that might be, everybody might think about that. You know, the reparations is repair. And just in half a minute, guilt check, I already said, throw guilt out the window. This isn't about guilt. No one's accusing you or your family or your ancestors or anything. It's about us. And it's not about white people, it's about this generation. All of us are trying to figure out what to do. Whether you're black, brown, or white, whether you came a long time ago or now. That's a challenge. And then finally, the writing of checks, it doesn't have to be that way. You're right, I agree, it's unworkable. But yet we have masses of impoverished black communities. What are we gonna do?
Yes. Yeah, Bishop Sutton, first of all, thank you. This has been rich. And we want to do something with that presentation that you made. And I'm going to talk with the president, and we'll be back in touch with you about that. But I think it needs to be shared much more broadly. I think there are two issues in addition to what's been said. A part of it is that when we have to protect a myth, it causes us to violate our values. You know, this country, was steeped in classism, in racism, in manifest destiny, all of those kinds of things. But we have a difficult time breaking down that myth because we won't look like we think we should look. And I'm not talking about race, I'm talking about the integrity of a country. And I think we can see that more clearly in these last couple of years than we were willing to see before. And so, the whole issue of losing, what is a profit to gain everything and lose yourself? I think that's why we, who believe in God's love and God's justice, we got to remember that we are the salt. And what is it we're trying to preserve? And I know there are many Christians that are trying to preserve another narrative, preserve the myth. But we who believe, we really, I think, need to know that we have got to preserve. That's what makes us persevere. Preserving the memory, preserving the alliances that we have had. I think the other thing is that because classism is so ingrained into our society, I think there are many people who are fearful that if people of color get more opportunities, they already feel lost. They already feel that they are living beneath the privilege of what it means to be white. And so that fear, that anger, if it's not addressed, other than, as you said, generating the hate. Because if somebody had something that I think belongs to me, I'm willing to bite anything that will tell me that I stand in an unjust situation. So my hope is that we not only think about racism, and you address classism within the African American community out of your own experience, but the issue of classism. The only time I have seen us work together has been when Jesse Jackson ran. And Jesse Jackson got the working class whites, he got the farmers, he got, until he did that Jaime thing, he had strong Jewish support as well as the African American. And because he addressed the issue of classism and asked each one, what is it that you feel you need from your country? And can we work together to make sure that that happens, not just culturally, but legislatively? So I do think that the issue of classism is one of the harsh realities that causes racism and the abandonment of our fundamental values. So
I agree. Do y'all agree? Yeah, I think increasing significance of class, actually measures of racism had been going down for a while. It's now ticked up a bit. But I do like to say to people, if I moved into an all-white neighborhood, probably in most of the overwhelming majority of places in America, I would be welcome. That wouldn't have been the case 50 years ago. I'd be welcome. But if I was a poor Black person, I probably wouldn't be. But also, if I were a poor white person, I think that goes to what you say. Class becomes an issue. Yeah?
I think the idea of keeping it local, keeping it within people's experience. I know one of the big moments in my own journey was when Bishop Baxter and Anthony Alexander made a video and had a conversation about growing up here in Harrisburg. You know, and there are two people very much alive who we know and love, and just telling the story of what happened to a vital Black neighborhood. And some honesty about decisions the diocese made, you know, that went into that within, you know, wasn't that long ago, back in the 60s or so, when many of us in this room were alive. And so I think keeping it,
Thank you.
you know, at least, yeah.
Yeah, and nationally, a big example of that, which we've learned more and more about in the last 5 years, is the Tulsa riot, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Burned down a whole community that was very prosperous and Black. Oh, I'd love to lead a discussion about reparations there. Descendants of those businesses that were gone, people wiped out. And so you're right.
They wanted to enlarge the capital.
Yeah. Well, you know, so keeping it local. I like diocese too, and here's why. I wouldn't want to see, and I didn't want to see this in Maryland, that every individual church is doing, that's their reparation scheme. It's fine to do something there. But diocese means you can do something on a bigger scale than any one individual can contribute. So if you had, I'm picturing Bishop Kevin 5 years from now with something at a press conference or so, representing the Episcopal Church in Susquehanna, doing something in the community on behalf of the diocese. That's why we're blessed to have diocese. One last thing for the next question. I didn't want to gloss over it. I was just too scared to say it, Bishop Baxter. But there's some internal feelings that have to be gone. And if in some way you were entitled, all of us are entitled in some way, and all of us are disregarded in some way. But here's the benefit of some anti-racism work. In this culture, in this nation, and in most nations in the world, white skin brings a benefit. And you may say, oh, sheesh, I'm struggling like everybody else. Okay. But the benefit is also emotional and psychological in our to have that benefit lessened. Who wants to see their benefits lessened? So I can say from my side of the fence, okay, you're just going to have to compete like all of us now. All of us. But there's less of a privilege for a particular job or something vis-a-vis any others because you're white skin. You're saying, welcome to the world. Because that old world could not stand. But it's hard for me as a black man to say, because I don't experience that. I do experience privilege from being tall. I experience privilege from having a lot of bad education. A lot of education. I have benefit of a title. Yeah, I have a lot of privilege on those fronts. I also I'm privileged by being married to the most beautiful, best woman in the world. I know, but I've done a longitudinal study of all the women in the world. And mine came out on top. So we all have privilege in some way, but it is hard. And some authors, some white authors have written some really good books on dealing with that issue of white privilege. It's very hard to talk about, especially if you're struggling. And if you're struggling economically, it's like, oh, Bishop, you get a lot of money. And I'm well paid. I'm underpaid, but I'm well paid. And I live in a nice house. And if someone is really struggling and they're white, it's going to be hard for me to talk about white privilege when you're really struggling. So I get that. But psychologically, I think there's a lot of work that white Americans have to do amongst yourselves. Amen. Not with black people around. There's a lot of talking you have to do among yourselves about what this means. Yeah.
My name is Anna Pruitt.
Can you hold it close here?
Sorry, I came to Pennsylvania in 1991, and with two small children. I was a single parent, and the only church that I knew of was the cathedral, and so I went there, and I was very faithful in the church anyway, and went there to the church every Sunday. And for several Sundays in a row, the dean said, well, don't forget to sign the visitor's book. And by the third time I said, I've already signed it. So I felt a little indignant, but I found out later that a woman who had arrived in Harrisburg about the same time and had started at the cathedral about the same time, had had a visit from the dean almost immediately. But she was a professor at Penn State, and I was a single parent with no money. I got a strong feeling about why the dean hadn't come to visit me, and I got a taste of what it was like to be, overlooked. I also had another story, was that I grew up in Rhodesia, which is a very segregated country. And when I came to this country in the 70s with my American husband, who was the son of a missionary, we were both very white supremacists. Not dyed in the wool, but certainly of that ilk. And unfortunately, the marriage, which actually was, we were married 15 years, but it came to an end when we had the children.
And I moved up to Pennsylvania, so my oldest son would go to Milton Ocean School, which is a school for children who are product of either broken homes or death, and they have to have financial need. So anyway, that's how I got to Pennsylvania, and after my marriage, I disintegrated. But I have to say that it didn't take me long after I was divorced to come into my own. I began to read, I began to hear. I moved to St. Paul's after leaving the cathedral, and I began to realize the pain and the suffering of people of color. And the more I read, the more militant I became, the more angry I became, because I felt that I had been in the dark for my whole life. But I'm not a mover and a shaker. I didn't know what to do with that anger. But being at St. Paul's has been very healing for me. I know I haven't always told anybody here how I feel, but I have been surrounded by people whose suffering I will never know anything about. I can never know anything about. And I just want you to know, dear friends, that I am so grateful for being surrounded by people who have taken me in, but allowed me to blossom in some ways. And it just owes so much to you. So thank you for being my family.
That's a beautiful word. Thank you for that. And at the last question, I would like, I'm saying, whenever the last question, let me know.
This is the last.
Okay. Okay, last question, and then I want to close by statement. Yeah.
This is just more an example of what we've been talking about as far as class. I was at a workshop many years ago now. I was on the school board here in Harrisburg, and I went to this workshop, and I heard people talk about trying to influence the schools in Boston. And the parents who were speaking were Black, and they said, we have the same issues as white parents as far as poorly resourced schools. But when we tried to go to the white parents, they wanted nothing to do with us because they were at least white. And I have never forgotten that, obviously, because that was decades ago. So there's so much in that. Leon Higginbotham's book, In the Matter of Color, talks about how ingrained this got to be in our psyches. And I do have, on the one side of my family, evidence that there was someone enslaved here in Pennsylvania, in a will of an ancestor. And I wonder what they passed down to me that I'm not even aware of, because they had to mess their minds up so much. They were indentured servants, and then they turned around. You know, what did they have to do to think that that was okay? I think about that all the time, that I don't even maybe know in myself.
Yeah, the issue of passing is by the way, if you ever want to be shocked about your ancestry, go and find your roots. Big learning from that. No one is all one thing. You may be surprised at all that we get. Well, I wanted to say this in closing. We're talking about, I gave this to talk about why we need Black History Month, what that means for Americans. The story of America is two dominant stories, and they're both true. One story of America is one of degradation, oppression, of practical genocide of indigenous peoples, of enslaving others, of theft, and that's a true story. The other true story is that America is a place of freedom, liberty, equal justice under the law, and where people from all over the world can come and live in freedom. And that's also a true story. We have two stories, and they're both true. Those two stories are also true about the Episcopal Church. The Episcopal Church has benefited from slavery, segregation, redlining, unfair banking, and all that. But the Episcopal Church, and especially increasingly, is a church that welcomes all, that seeks to do the right thing, that is about the dignity of every human being, and at the forefront of movements for justice and the integrity of creation. Both those stories are true. But if I were to be honest, both of those stories, elements of it, are true in my life. I am two stories too. I'm a sinner, and I'm a saint. And yet I'm here. And this is what I want to end with. At the end of the day, that Statue of Freedom outside of New York still stands. And that statue means a lot to the world. That America is the place where you can come. And no matter where you came from, you will be given an opportunity and justice for all. We got to keep that story alive and just know that I have every confidence that this nation is going to be an even more just nation than it is now, 50 years ago. 50 years ago, I would not have been welcomed as a worshiper in most of the congregations in the Diocese of Maryland. And yet, 40 years after 68, I was elected bishop on the first ballot. That's a lot of change. And you can do that in America. So this thing about reparations, we can do this. It's in our DNA to do the right thing. We can do this, and we will do this. And may the Episcopal Church take the lead in that happen. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for the time.
Bishop Sutton, before you leave, we just want to thank you for having come to us, for giving us such a wonderful, powerful message, and for getting us started on where we are going with this diocese and with the people in this area. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Terry.
That you are invited downstairs to our conference room now to see the works of the students that performed this morning. There will be a video, the documentary that Sinai Lester created, and it's called 4 Days in the Sun. 4 Years in the Sun, and you will see some of the things that Bishop Sutton just spoke about. You will see them in this documentary. It is worth seeing. So please come down and see that now while the choir prepares for the 4 o'clock program.
So we will come back together for prayer, for Jazz Vespers at 4 o'clock. So please use this time to see the rest of the submissions. I also want to say as we walk out that if reparations is relationship, if reparations is vulnerability, if reparations is walking in each other's skin and holding each other's stories, we have begun that with the children who shared so well this morning, with the meal that we shared, and with hearing this talk. So thank you all.
Thank you.
That's all.
At this time, all choir members and all musicians, please move forward so that we